Hello and welcome to week 2, the Scenario Design Basics for the course In Action Integration Framework for SAP Business One. My name is Miriam Rieger, and in this unit I will tell you about managing scenarios. The objectives in this unit are the scenario activation and testing. Here we explain the two methods for activation a scenario and to trigger and test a scenario. The message log, how to view the XML message in the message log and to perform actions on a message from the message log. The scenario transport, also called export and import, how to transport the scenario from the development environment to the live system. Let's start with the first topic, the scenario activation and testing. In the scenario lifecycle, the next steps after the scenario steps creation and the SLD definition is to activate and test it before you export it to a customer system. The plug-and-play nature of integration scenarios means that you can develop and test scenarios using your development environment and then package and transport the scenario to your customer's productive system without making any changes. A scenario must be activated before you can test and run it. There are two ways to activate a scenario. The first way is to activate it from the Scenario Package Setup window by choosing the icon to run the setup wizard. Or the second way is manually select the sender and receiver systems, then choose Activate. After activation, the scenario package status changes from design to active. If you set up a scenario with a time trigger, you can manually trigger the scenario to test it at any time. You see a list of all active scenarios under Scenarios and then Control. If the scenario has a trigger, the trigger button will be active. Choose this button, then confirm by choosing the trigger button in the next window. Just a small tip: if you need a trigger to test SAP Business One scenarios, you can use under Tools the trigger B1 Event Generator. When we test this week's scenario, it produces a comma-delimited file in the folder specified in the File Out section of the SLD entry for the outbound file. The file is formatted from Payload R section of the XML message by the outbound adapter. Let's go to the system and see how to activate the scenario. To activate the scenario, you go under Scenarios, and then you can activate it manually under Setup. First you have to choose your scenario. If it's not here, then click on this button, select your scenario and say Select. I have it here. And then you can click on Activate to activate it. To use the wizard, you go under Control. You see here the list of your available scenarios. And there you can click on this button, the Setup Wizard. And this wizard goes step by step through the activation. You have to select and say Activate your scenario, then click on Next. Then you have to choose your sender and receiver system. We have here the f.any system. Then click on Next, and here you see the time trigger, and you can deploy this scenario. and you can set it active by clicking to set this, to activate this, and to say activate. We confirm this message, and the activation is completed. Let's go back to the slides. We want also to test the scenario, so we go back to the system. And as you saw on the slides, we have a trigger here, and by clicking on this trigger, we can trigger this scenario. This trigger was successful. And here in the defined folder, we find the first export. I can open the downloaded file here. I want to trigger it again. I can click here on trigger. And the system exported a second file with another number at the end with the number first. So back in the slides. The next topic is the message log. The message log captures all messages being processed through the integration framework. The log can be a useful tool for troubleshooting scenarios that you develop. Since there is an overhead in logging, full message logging is enabled by default in the development system profile. A minimal level of logging is done in the productive system profile. Information recorded in the log includes status, scenario packages and step, sender and receiver system, trigger, date and time, plus any error message. The message log displays by default messages for the last 24-hour period. You can adjust this time period if you want to see existing messages outside the time range, in this case the 24 hours. But you can see only those messages accordingly to your cleanup settings. Other filtering options include sender or receiver system, sender trigger, package and step names, and the status of the message. You can even define your own search keys to get fast search results. This will be part later in this course, in the last course week. The status filters are success, failure, processing or filtered. Success: the XML message was sent successfully, processed by the integration scenario. Failure: a scenario step failed with an error. The error message is included in the log, and the status icon and result message are both highlighted in red. Processing indicates a message is in process. It may be stuck in an internal queue. And filtered: messages that no scenario step has subscribed to, or messages that the processing logic has filtered. For each scenario step, you have the option to define two search keys. Search keys are defined in the scenario package. You can perform actions on the XML message in the log. Debug the message. This opens the transaction ID panel for debugging. Open the XML message to view the payload sections. Note that the payload sections are only available if full message logging is enabled. Or retry the message. Note that you only get the debug and retry actions if you have set the log level for the message log to full message. Let's go to the system to see how it works. You go under the tab monitoring, and then under message log. There you have the filtering options, and you see here the 24-hour period, here to this one. And to display messages, click on the display and refresh button. There you have the 3 actions. You can debug this message, you can display this message, or you can resend this message. And at the end you see all relevant information for this message. We talked about the 24-hour period, and you see you can also enhance it to say I want to see the last 48 hours, for example, but it depends on your settings. And this setting is by default when you go under maintenance, message log, configure message log, you have here the button daily deletion. And when you click on it, you see that the default setting is 5 days. If we reduced it only to 1 day, you see only the 24-hour messages, but not the last 48 hours if you want to see it. Then, if you want to see it, then you have to change it to 2 or 3 days, maybe, to see the last 48 hours. And it depends also that error messages are still included, and the others, they will be deleted after this, in this case by default, 5 days. Let's go to the slides. And in the last topic, I want to talk about the scenario transport. To transport the scenario package or scenario step to the customer side, choose the export tool. The scenario is exported as a zip file, and you can include test messages, individual systype properties, and individual global tables with the exported scenario. When you import the scenario package at the customer side, it is added to the BizStore. You then need to create and assign the SLD entries and activate the package. If you import a scenario step, the integration framework provides the following functions: archiving the current version before import, creating a scenario package for the step, and assigning the step to the scenario package. Let's go to the system and see this functionality. Before we export the scenario, we have to deactivate it. It's now deactivated. We can also go to Setup, and you see the button changed from deactivate to activate. That means the scenario is now deactivated and you can activate it again, but we don't want to do this. Before I export this, I want to give them, because I worked on this scenario, a new version. And in this case, it's version 2.0.0. I save this. And then I go to Export. I select the scenario. If it's not available in your system, go to this button and select your scenario from the list. And then you can add the test messages, the individual type properties, and the individual global tables. And then say package export. It's now exported. And we exported at the moment the scenario with the version 2.0.0. And I want to set it back in the system to show you the different versions. I change in the system to version 1. The definition is now saved. And when I import the scenario, I choose the scenario. It's here. This is what we exported. I can import the individual systype properties and the global tables, and I submit it. And I say, before I say import, here you see the scenario name and the current version in the system, because I changed it to version 1, and the version of the zip file is version 2. So we get a newer version now imported to the system. Click on import and it's imported. Let's go back to the slides. And in this unit you saw how to activate a scenario and to manually trigger it for testing. Also you saw how to use the message log and how it can be a useful debugging tool when you develop a scenario, allowing you to debug a scenario internally, view the XML message with the payload sections, and resend a message in the integration framework. In the last topic, you saw how to export a scenario from a development environment and import it to the live system. This completes the units for week 2. You can now optionally complete the week 2 assignment. Thank you for attending this week, and I hope you enjoyed it. We wish you all the best for creating the scenario and the weekly assignment. Next week you learn about SAP Business One, and we want to create another integration scenario. This scenario is about an HTTP call to SAP Business One. See you in next week. Bye bye.